Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. The election is done, we've got some coverage there, but also we've dug out some really interesting data. We've gone beyond the headlines, and when we've looked at house prices, we've discovered a chart that we've never talked about before. It's going to be a great episode.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. In case you don't know, we buy more than £100 million worth of property every year for our clients. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And this is the show where we bring you for free what we've learned along the way. Okay, it's time for the market update and lots of stories coming up, but we have to start with the election because that, along with the football, has dominated everyone's attention for the past few weeks. But we have good news. The good news is it's over. We don't have to think about it anymore. And the other good news, maybe, Rob, I don't know, you can tell me if it's good news, is we have a new housing minister. What can you tell us about our new housing minister?
The early signs are promising, Rob. Now, the new government has been in power less than a week, so there isn't loads of policy news to bring you, but we do have positive news, as Rob said, about the housing minister, because the reason why I say it's positive is Matthew Pennycook, our new housing minister, has actually been involved in housing policy with Labour since 2021. Why is that important? Well, we've had so many housing ministers under the Tory government that I honestly couldn't tell you the last five. I stopped taking notice because it was like a revolving door. It was a bit of a joke position. It's like the job that nobody wanted or nobody stuck with. But the fact we have an MP that's been involved so heavily with property for so long is a positive sign. Now, it could just be business as normal and 9 months we'll have another one. But hopefully that's not the case. And let's go in with optimism, because if you're going to truly change something within housing, you need stability in the leadership. And hopefully that's what we're getting here. Early days, Rob, no promises. Of course, we don't speak for the Labour government, but at least it's a positive sign that it's somebody who's got experience in property and has been consistently involved with property for a number of years now.
That's right. I think a lot of people listening won't necessarily like a lot of what the new government has said in the past around the private rented sector and what they may plan to do in the future. But I think you're right that ultimately having someone in that role with experience who understands the issues, even if they have a different perspective on those issues from your own, is better than having someone parachuted into that role who really doesn't have a clue what any of it means, because they would probably just listen to whoever shouts the loudest. But for now, the election is done. It was nothing if not decisive, and that's likely to be good news for the housing market, because now everyone can crack on knowing what they're dealing with. So that brings us on to house prices. We've got our three regular house price indices, Zoopla, Nationwide and Halifax. Rob, I will read you out the numbers from each for the last month, then you can give us some analysis. So May in the housing market. Zoopla said prices are flat. Nationwide say prices are up by 0.2%. Halifax says prices are down by 0.2%. Rob, some big numbers in there. Can you bring us the story behind that data?
I think I'm struggling here. There's been lots to talk about over the last few weeks about the election, and the house prices over the last few weeks is not giving us a lot to work with here. It's flat. That's the story. I think it's the data within the data that's interesting. So if you look at the information from Zoopla, there's a really interesting index, which I'll be honest, I've not come across before. It's where they have an index for how property is priced and is it priced fairly. And they say at the moment that UK property, and remember, that's a very broad property market. You've got London in there, you've got Scotland, anywhere in the UK, basically, is in there. But that's a real mix of a property sector. However, even when taking that into account, it says it's 8% overvalued at the moment against what they say is fair value. And by the end of the year, it will be fair value again. But what was interesting when I looked at the chart is actually they've said that since 2009, all the way till very, very recently, property has been undervalued. And that's really interesting. And the way they've done this is they take the average household income and they look at mortgage rates, and then they look at how much income people have to put towards those mortgages, and then they make an assessment on affordability. So when looking at this, you can see spikes in 07 and 89, but since 2009 until very recently, it's said that property has been undervalued. And property prices haven't surged recently, it's just that interest rates have gone up. But you can see where the chart is moving and where it predicts to move in future is that property is undervalued again. I don't think this is the best method of assessing value for property, but it's a method and I think it's interesting. The reason why I don't think it's the best is because not everybody uses a mortgage. People have different amounts of leverage. And London as a market and let's say the Northeast as a market are so different, they may as well be in different countries. But even with all that said, I think it's interesting, Rob, to look at that chart. We'll link to it in the show notes so people can see for themselves and just assess, okay, well, actually, people have said property prices have been overvalued, but when you look at this chart, at times they really, really have, but more recently, they are more affordable. Now, if people aren't on the property market, that may annoy them a little, but if you look at this chart, it's suggesting that basically since the end of the 70s to the early 90s, property was overvalued. Then the late 90s, it was kind of fair value. 2000s, it was overvalued. And since '09, as I've said, it's been undervalued. Don't think many people would have said that, Rob. All you hear is property's overvalued.
Yeah, which is because people are looking at nominal prices rather than inflation-adjusted prices. And what you've just said fits in really nicely with the chart that Nationwide regularly publishes of property prices in real terms, i.e. adjusted for inflation. And that shows a giant run-up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then a decline and then a flat line for a very, very long time. So both those charts with different methodologies have identified the same thing, which is that there was this one period where property prices really were going nuts. And the rest of the time, not so much. And that ties into an episode about the 18-year property cycle, where we're going to be revisiting our thoughts on that and where we are in the cycle. And if there even is a cycle, that's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Something else that caught my eye within the house price data, which really is the story of this year, is the regional variation in performance. And specifically within that, the north-south divide. We said back in January that this would be something we'd see throughout this year, and it is indeed playing out. And Nationwide has published in their report a map showing where prices are falling versus rising. And it just makes it incredibly stark. Basically, everywhere south of Birmingham, prices are falling, and everywhere else, they're rising. So that flat as a pancake performance that you're seeing at a national level is the result of two opposite patterns playing out at regional level. And the final thing that caught my eye from the Zoopla report specifically is that they've said that although prices are flat, they now expect prices to rise by 1.5% by the end of the year. This is something we've seen with lots of forecasts. If you remember back to the start of this year, the consensus was probably down about 4% was what everyone was saying. I've not seen anyone predicting falls for the rest of this year recently. And this Zoopla data is the latest case of them now anticipating prices rising, which is good news for the market, but bad news for me if it does go up by 1.5%, because that will mean that my forecast for this year was completely wrong. And I think, Rob, from memory, yours will be much closer to being correct.
Well, Rob, there's a long way to go, so I'm not going to get cocky or smug. And another group of property investors that won't be feeling cocky or smug at the moment are people who adopt the holiday let strategy. I mean, the weather that we've had this summer has not helped, and I feel very sorry for people who operate holiday lets because, let's face it, if we are lucky enough to get out the UK and see a bit of sun at the moment, we're all working hard to do that. Now, it's not to say there aren't beautiful places in the UK, there certainly are, and there are lots and lots of listings because there's lots of beautiful places in the UK. And research from the London estate agent Benham and Reeves has said that across most of the nation, the amount of short-term lets available compared to last year is up, which is really interesting that even more people have come to the market. And it's not just one area. Manchester, London, both up significantly. Manchester at 29%, London at 22%. The Lake District up by 15%, Cotswolds up by 10%. Somerset, Dorset, Devon, Cornwall, all up. In fact, the only notable area with a reduction in holiday lets is Edinburgh. And this, combined with the weather, has meant that annual revenues have declined for the people in this market. Dorset and Cotswolds are down 14% year on year in revenue received. Devon down 16%. So when you have more supply and a decreasing demand, occupancy rates fall, which this data also reflects. And then, of course, revenues fall as well. So it's not a great picture at the moment. Rob, we don't have a holiday lets agenda. We're just reporting the news. The news isn't good. I suppose if you tried to find a silver lining to this is that you would expect people to start exiting the market because it is a tough market to operate, and then the supply will diminish. Although property isn't a liquid, so you can't just press a button and your buy-to-let disappears. That will take time. So it's not a quick fix, but possibly that's the direction of travel in the future. I was really surprised to see that there was more listings compared to last year. That, out of all this data, is the one that I wasn't expected to see here. Decline in revenues and occupancy rates down, yes, but not an increase in the amount of stock available.
No, it seems like some people are slow to get the memo that the market is out of balance at the moment. And I think that will correct itself over time. We had a bit of an HMO bubble a few years ago, if you remember that, where everyone was turning everything into an HMO. And we ended up with an oversupply in many areas. And it wasn't necessarily the newest ones that struggled. So if you have got into holiday lets recently, then don't worry, it doesn't mean you're doomed. With HMOs, it was the poorest quality ones or the least well-located ones that ended up struggling. And eventually those people sold off or they converted them back into family homes, and the market corrected itself. It came back into balance. So I imagine over the coming years, we'll see the same pattern play out in the world of holiday lets, perhaps hurried along with a bit of legislation as well. We will see. Let's move on to talking about a little bit of rental news around deposits, which caught my eye this week, which I thought was interesting. And the headline is 17% of deposits don't cover rent arrears or damage by tenants. And that's up from 13% last year, but we've only got 2 years of data and I don't know what's normal, so you can't say that's a trend. But in any case, the number that caught my eye more than that one is that half of tenancy ended without any costs being incurred by the tenant. So the deposit was returned in full. And that's actually higher than I expected. I was trying to think back over my own portfolio and I've not been tracking it. So I'm just going off the top of my head and say, yeah, maybe it is about half where the deposit gets returned in full because there aren't any issues at all. But I assumed that at a national level, by the time you take into account properties at the lower end of the market, I thought there'd be more deductions than that. So I take this as a good news story, Rob. You hear a lot about evictions and tenants refusing to move out. You hear a lot about damage, but you hear about those things because they are exciting and they grab your emotions. But this is a nice reminder that most of the time, in most cases, especially if you do the right checks up front, everything turns out okay.
Yes, it's not really a great story to tell that you let a property out, tenant was great, they left, you returned deposit. It's not one that's going to have people on the edge of their seat. So that story doesn't get told that much, but the data tells us that is the story more often than not, which is great, as you said. What's also great is to see some innovation within the mortgage market. And we don't often talk about individual products on this show. We save that for our mortgage market updates. But TSB have recently launched a product where if you are a landlord, you can sell to your tenant. And if you sell with a 10% discount, they don't need to put a single penny towards a deposit. So that discount that you're giving is seen as the deposit instead. Now, you may be listening to this and going, why on earth would I want to do that? But if you've got a property that you've got a tenant sitting in there right now, you want to move it on, maybe you're doing a monopoly strategy and you're trying to sell some off and buy some new ones, whatever your motivation may be, the time it might take for that tenant to exit, get it ready to sell, and then have it sold can take a fair bit of time. But you can continue to receive income while you go through this process with your tenant and then achieve a sale with no agent's fees as well. So there's some savings there. I've not known anybody to use it yet, to be fair. I've only just found out about this product. But I just love, Rob, that there's some different types of products coming to the market, some innovation. There's obviously been a bit of thought put into this product, and I just think it's great to see.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's something that's going to be increasingly more demand. And in fact, we get a fair few questions coming into our Sunday Times column about people asking about selling to their tenants. So if someone is looking to exit, they're looking to do so after a long time, so absolutely maximising the price isn't their main consideration. And given what a giant pain selling a property actually is, if you can sell it to the people who already live there, that's a great result. So a product that makes that easier, I'm all for it. I'm also all for rate cuts in general. I'm in favour of mortgages being cheaper, and that's something we've seen a lot of over the past couple of weeks as well. So Accord, LendInvest, West One and the Mortgage Works all reducing their buy-to-let rates. And I believe by the time of our next market update, we will have had the Bank of England's next rate-setting meeting, their first one post-election. And given that inflation has actually come back to target now, it's probably more likely or not that they will make the first cut that we've seen to the base rate for a long time. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that affects mortgage pricing over the next couple of months.
I've got some other news for you as well. The news is that there are people who've listened to this podcast this far in and they still haven't signed up for Property Pulse, which is just bonkers to me. Property Pulse is written by our wonderful Rob D. It's absolutely free. It's a brilliant newsletter, in my opinion. A little biased, but I do believe this. It is the best newsletter on property investment that you can find, and I've subscribed to others. It is the best. You get it each and every Friday, and to get it, all you need to do is go to propertyhub.net/pulse. Sign up. It's an absolute no-brainer. If you've got any interest in property, it's a must. So do that now.
Okay, just before we wrap up, it is time for Hub Extra, that part of the show where we bring you something that's going to enrich your life in some kind of way, whether that's a book, a tip, a tool, something we've been enjoying. And Rob, I think you've got this week's in the bag.
Haha, love it. Yes. This week I am bringing you a bag. It's better than that though, stick with me. Because I am a geek, I can't just go online and say, oh, that's a nice bag and buy it. I have to do research and I have to watch YouTube videos and I have to make sure I pick the best bag. Now, last time I did this, I got myself a North Face bag probably 10 years ago and I still use it today. It was research well done and it's been an amazing bag. I've been so happy with it. And I've had other bags in between since where I didn't put as much time in, but for some reason I wanted to go down the rabbit hole of finding the best backpack I could. And my assessment of what's best is best value for money. So you can go and spend £400 on a backpack, and that might be the best backpack. But what I wanted is the most bang for my buck. What could I get that every pound spent means I'm getting the most quality possible? And the bag I landed on is a bag by Air, which is AER. I've gone for the day pack because I wanted a day-to-day bag. But you've got so many different options there for so many different scenarios. So if you need something a little bigger, you can go for the Day Pack X Pack, which is a little bigger. But they've got the Tech Pack, they've got flight bags. There's loads there. But the reason I'm happy to recommend them, and there's no affiliate scheme here, there's no endorsement. I had to pay for this bag. It's just that I've been really happy with it. The quality is superb. So my bag was £159, but really well made. And I've been really, really happy with the quality. You can pay similar and just get a very, very average bag. So take advantage of my geekiness, the time I put in for the research. If you are after a new bag, check out that brand. If you're after a day-to-day commuter bag, then the Day Pack I can highly recommend. But I've just been very happy with the quality. So I'm bringing it to the podcast and sharing it with you all.
I'm looking at it now. It does look lovely and lots of those little interior organising-y pockets. I'm a sucker for those little pockets. So that looks great and we will link to it in the show notes, of course. Just before we finish, a quick shout out to listener Tahir, who says, I've learned a lot through your content and it's made me a more confident investor. Since we started listening, we purchased 2 properties in 2023 and the search for more continues. Well done for taking action, Tahir. And I hope 2024 is a buying year for you as well. So that is us done. You can consider yourself updated and we'll see you back here for the Property Podcast again next week. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.